This video you just watched is my first ever attempt to do something in Blender. I have been following a lot of CGI content since I was a teenager, but I have never got the chance to try it myself. After finally getting a good laptop, I decided it was time to give it a shot. In the end I will try to make something even cooler, don't miss it. Have you ever seen those satisfying 3D renders? They have a simple promise, but the result is cool. As I mentioned, one of the most watched type of video for me on YouTube is 3D effect and rendering content. And the YouTuber I have watched the most is Corridor Crew. Their videos are informative without requiring deep understanding, and I enjoy watching their reaction video too. When I saw them doing 3D render challenge, I thought maybe I could do something cool too. I don't have to spend the rest of my life being the kind of people who just watch instead of create. Anyway, here is what I come up with. A rock that gets thrown from above, hit the ground and break into many pieces. Oh, pretty simple for a start, right? Now I need to choose a software that will let me do all of this for free. The most famous and obvious choice is Blender. A lot of people recommend it as a starting point. And because it's an open source, there are tons of free tutorials online. After choosing the app, I opened it and deleted the default square, then start playing around with the buttons. The first video I saw was about a guy making a donut. You might have already seen it. This video is literally the front door to Blender. After skipping around and watching many other tutorials, I felt ready for this project. I had to break my project into 3 parts. Part 1 modeling, part 2 shading, part 3 animation and rendering. Let's start with the modeling. I start with default square in Blender. I cut it randomly using various tools, then applied a subdivisor modifier. The result I got was fine, so I decided to go with it. Now I needed a way to break my model into many pieces. I found a tool called Surfractor online, and it worked like magic. You just press a button and it cut everything for you. I went with whatever it gave me since it was my first time using the software. Now I had to create a floor, the surface that the rock is supposed to fall into. For this I simply press Shift plus A, selected the basic mesh and choose the plan option. Okay, I guess the modeling part is over. Let's move on to shading. This is really important. It gives the whole composition its style. I wanted the rock to look like a crystal and shine. For this I used a simple material by following a YouTube video, then added a value to make it emissive so it would shine with its color. I also made it somewhat reflective so it would look like a crystal, but to make it shine, it needed something to reflect. So I added a light source near the scene and removed the sunlight, since I needed to show the glowing effect of the rock. For the floor, I just wanted something metallic and reflective, also black, to keep the vibe I wanted to achieve with this composition. Now that the shading was done, I had to animate the rock. You might wonder why I split the modeling part before. If I wanted to simulate a rock getting destroyed, just think about it. Splitting in 3D software is literally perfect, which means you aren't removing any weight while cutting. If all of the pieces stay in their original location and drop all at once, it will be the same as one rock dropping, but you don't have to care about the breaking part, you just have to move the pieces. That's how we will achieve our goal. But how? How do I animate them perfectly? After a quick search, I found a tool called Rigid Body Physics. This tool allows you to choose active part which move and passive part which stays still. The active part moves toward the passive part, and since the floor is just below the rock, it mimics gravity. All I have to do was assign the same force to each pieces, and the effect worked perfectly. Boom! It worked. Yes! Now I just had to set the camera and render the scene. I went back online, choose the right resolution and render type, and decide to test cycle since it handles light and reflection better. After setting everything, including the output folder, camera angle and encoding setting, I was ready to see the result. My laptop was doing its best to render. The GPU was at 85 degrees and it was super hot, but in the end it finished and it worked. Nice, the result was exactly what I wanted. I was so happy to see this animation come to life. It is super exciting to see this animation working. It really put happiness on my heart. I have only wondered about how does it work before, and no one around me really gave me the right answer. Today I am doing it on my own. Yes! Still, there is one thing left to this video. It needs sound. At first I thought I could generate audio the same way I generate picture from the camera perspective. I thought there were tools that could calculate audio output on a frame by frame basis and track the sound wave just like the light in the scene. I was wrong. This tool still doesn't exist. So if I want sound, I will have to edit it in. I opened Premiere Pro, downloaded sound effect from a website and started placing the right sound at the right time to match the movement of the pieces. Voila, this is the final result. This video should have been over when I made my first simulation in Blender, but that would have been the case if I made this video a year ago. Since I was late to the game, I had to make this cooler, especially since I just upgraded my laptop and got a new desktop PC thanks to my father, the best father on this planet. When I started this project, I wasn't thinking of making a video out of it. All I wanted to do was trying something new. but a lot has changed in the past year. If I want to make a video from this Blender project, I need to add a story to it. So what if I change the ratio, adjust the camera position and make it work for a short form video? Instead of making a single shot and looping it, I will try to break the rock from 0 cuts to 1,000,000 bricks. This is my new vision. Keep breaking the rock into more pieces until I reach 1,000,000 pieces. Stay tuned to see the final result. Do you think 1,000,000 bricks is possible? I started by copying the project from my old hard drive and putting it into the new PC. I opened the Blender, I downloaded the Refractor plugin and began working. Since the last save was after I already cut the rock, I had to join the pieces into one object again. And it's super easy to do. Just select the desired meshes, then press Ctrl+G. Once that was done, I worked on the camera view and animation. After finishing the keyframe, all I had to do was start rendering. It took 35 minutes. Shit, why? It was supposed to be faster with this new system. Why was rendering still taking so long? Why? Was a 4060 Ti not that strong after all? After some research, I found out I was using the wrong rendering code, CUDA instead of optics. It turned out that CUDA is good for CPU rendering, not GPU rendering. To see the full power of my GPU, I should have been using optics. Once I switched, Blender crashed. I thought it was a driver issue, but everything was up to date. After some more troubleshooting, I found a setting that was checked by default, and when I checked it, everything worked fine. I looked online and that option does not really affect my current project, so let's keep going. The next scene was easy. Just select the rock, split it in half with self-fractor, delete the old rock, and add the rigid body for the new pieces. Adjust the camera animation and render it. This time rendering was faster. After switching the render settings to optics, it took only 10 minutes. Great, let's keep going. This project will end soon with this current progression. For the next step, I had to bring back the old rock since I couldn't break those two pieces without keeping the base shape. I copied it from the old file, press Ctrl+G to join the pieces and broke them into 8 parts. I adjusted the camera and rendered it. It took 30 minutes this time. I repeated the process, breaking the rock into 64 pieces then 400. Everything was going smoothly until I tried breaking it into 5,000 pieces. This task was too much for my PC to handle, and no matter how I changed the settings for the Refractor plugin, it couldn't handle it. After an hour of searching online, I finally figured out the problem. I wasn't using the plugin properly this whole time. I found a tutorial that explained how to use it correctly. Learning from someone who knows is definitely better than figuring things out on your own. When I went back to my project, I managed to make 5,000 pieces, and this time everything worked. I didn't change the camera animation because I noticed that when I started breaking the rock into many pieces, it will start shuttering before it hit the ground, which will break the effect. To fix this, I decided to use the previous render and cut directly to the new one. This meant I had to keep the same camera settings to make the transition smooth. After 35 minutes of rendering, I found that there was a strange issue. The rock didn't drop, it was floating. The first thing that came to my mind is that Blender is struggling to get the next keyframe for each piece. This led to random animation. Rendering is a heavy task, so if I can lower the workload during rendering, maybe it would work. The answer had to be baking the animation. I remember seeing a YouTuber talk about baking the animation years ago, and if I remember correctly, it is to counter this issue. I found a video on how to bake an animation, and I did bake it. I started rendering and it worked. Yes, 5,000 pieces is finished. What about the next scene? 50,000 pieces. To be honest, I doubt Blender could handle it. Throughout my work with the Blender, I have noticed it runs slowly once there are multiple pieces in a scene. Strangely, it doesn't fully utilize my CPU or GPU. After checking online, I discovered that sometimes it's not about hardware, but the software's coding. If the software uses CPU specific code, no matter how powerful your GPU is, it won't be utilized. Similarly, if the CPU code doesn't leverage multiple cores, even a high-end CPU won't perform at full capacity. It's like asking a big muscular guy to sew without any experience. He might have the ability, but without the right knowledge, he will struggle. Only when equipped with the proper information, he can succeed. It's the same here. Now that I have explained my doubt, it's time to start on the 50,000 pieces scene. I will apply what I have learned so far. My approach is to work within Blender's limitation. It can only handle about 5,000 objects per brick. I will break the rock into a small number of pieces first, then split each of those into 5,000, allowing me to exceed the 50k mark. I already have the original rock split into 23 pieces, so if I divide each piece into 2,500, I will reach my goal. At first, this method seemed to work. Each brick took only 5 minutes, but as the pieces increased, the process slowed significantly. By the 5th brick, it became nearly impossible. The task took hours, and Blender eventually crashed. Checking the task manager, I noticed both of the CPU and GPU weren't heavily used, yet Blender crashed before finishing. This reaffirmed my suspicion. Blender doesn't fully utilize multiple cores of the CPU or the GPU for these simulations. I tried a workaround, opening a new Blender file, splitting each part of the 23 parts separately into 2,500 pieces, then copying machine and pasting them back into the current project. This sped up the process, and in just 1 hour I reached 50,000 pieces. Next, all I have to do is animating them. I added the rigid body physics to all of the pieces, knowing I had to bake the animation before rendering. Blender struggled with 5,000 pieces, so literally 50,000 was a nightmare. I started baking the animation and went to sleep. 10 hours later, Blender was still unresponsive. The RAM and SSD were maxed out. The CPU and GPU were chilling. They were barely utilized. This puzzled me. I have no other choice but to wait. I start streaming the new code from the Xbox. Maybe, after just a little bit of time, this task will finish. After a long research, I found the answer. We already know that Blender don't use the GPU for this kind of task, and Blender don't use multi-core of the CPU that well either. So it's logical that the workload for both of the CPU and GPU is low. I learned that Blender requires a massive RAM for baking. It stores the position, rotation, and scale of every individual piece for every frame to calculate the next frame. With over 1.5 million polygons, this process is incredibly demanding. The SSD usage was due to Windows using it as a virtual memory when RAM is full. While the SSD are fast, they will never match the speed of 6200 MHz of RAM. Now that I understand everything, what should I do next? Do I have to stop the baking process, just wait, or should I try a new approach? The crazy part about all of this is that I am lucky. The electricity stayed on for over 24 hours without shutting down. The risk of losing all of this progress due to a power outage is terrifying, so instead of waiting, I decided to end it myself. At this point, I start reflecting. I bought this new PC thinking nothing would ever stop me again. I carefully choose each part of the build, but I never imagined the RAM would hit its limit so soon. What I tried right now is adjusting the RAM allocation for the hard drive. The SSD default to 6GB, so I changed it to 200GB. Surely that would work, right? No. After waiting an hour, nothing changed. It was exactly the same as before. Using the SSD was no longer an option. I began wondering, how large is this data? It needs over 200GB of RAMs. I couldn't figure it out because the structure of the RAM is completely different from that of a hard drive. Buying more RAM wasn't an option either. I couldn't afford it. The PC is still on loan, and I have to repay the money I borrowed. The curiosity was killing me. Then I had an idea. What if I use a cloud rendering service with a free trial? They had definitely have a better system than mine. I found a website to upload my animation and start rendering. Everything seemed fine, but when I checked the frames, I realized they skipped the animation calculation parts instead of struggling through them. Pointless this was. All the frames were the same. Next, I searched for a PC with a Windows interface that I could rent. I found a website offering a $5 coupon for new users. Perfect. Renting a high-performance PC with more RAM than mine for 20 minutes to bake the animation sounded like the ideal solution. I found a system with 64GB of RAM and started baking, but even 64GB wasn't enough. The process took forever and the RAM filled up again. I wasn't going to spend more money for nothing. I returned to the site and found a deal with 190GB of RAM. Nothing can stop me now. It was a little expensive and the coupon was about to expire. I checked my brother's Visa account and found $10. I decided to use $5 of it and repay him later. With 15 minutes on that machine, I downloaded the project from Google Drive and launched it. I started baking it immediately and I discovered the RAM requirement was actually 17GB. At least I found the answer. There was no way my 32GB system could ever handle it. All that waiting had been for nothing. Even with this powerful rented machine, the baking was stuck on the first frame. After 10 minutes, it became obvious. I need more time on this machine. I couldn't afford it. Do I really need to go through all of this? This video probably won't get any view anyway. But as I turned off this system, I thought, who cares? I removed those self-limitation thought month ago. I just needed a cup of tea. I went outside to grab some tea and on my way back I ran into my cousin. I started venting about everything. He doesn't know much about PCs, so I had to explain everything from scratch. I rambled non-stop about the video, the problem I was facing, and the solution I had tried. I said, you know what, bro? Number can be so misleading. When I rendered the first scene, I thought 1 million was possible. When I rendered 5,000 pieces in 35 minutes, I calculated that 50,000 would take 350 minutes. But reality doesn't work like that. I reached a number I couldn't handle. No matter how long I wait, my PC just doesn't have the power. I'm not even sure if Blender can handle it. We always criticize people at the top, saying why don't they just do this or that. It's obvious, are they stupid? But our perspective is limited by our experience. We have never been responsible for more than 10 people at once, and even that is hard. Imagine leading millions. The bigger the number is, the more uncontrollable things become, until you reach the point where the entire system needs to change for it to work. I have always hated being a leader, and now I hate it even more. Going back to what I was mainly saying, maybe I have to change the software and start learning Houdini. It may took me another 15 days, but I don't know. What should? He interrupted me and said, you have been rambling for an hour. Why not stop at 10,000 pieces? Isn't that enough? The idea will be the same and you will finish much faster. Then move on to another project. Also, 5,000 polygons seems like a good enough number for me. Why torture yourself? He had a point. I realized it didn't need to hit the million pieces. I could test my PC limit first. I thanked him and went back to work. The first thing I tried was copying 12,000 objects from the 50,000 pieces and bake them in a new file. It used 21 GB of RAM, and after a few minutes it worked. I thought I could repeat the process for all the pieces, but then I realized the rocks from different simulations wouldn't interact with each other. That made the whole idea meaninless. This time I listened to the advice for real. I stopped at 15,000 pieces. I broke the simulation into smaller chunks. I break each part of the 23 slices into 700 pieces on a new Blender file, then copied them back to the main Blender project. After I reached the 15,000 pieces, I added the rigid body and started baking. Finally, it worked. I changed the color of the rock to red for dramatic effect and adjusted the camera for an epic scene. After 30 minutes of rendering, it was done. Watching the final footage, I noticed one last problem. The rock started breaking apart before hitting the ground. To fix it, I have to fake a perfect transition. What I did is I got the original rock and make it drop on the same plane. But this time I removed all of the physics property from it and created a new one with a rigid body below it. Like this, the rock will just go through the first plane, a perfect for a smooth transition. That will do the trick. Editing was next. I downloaded the sound I needed. I picked up a soundtrack and sync everything. This video was finally done. I uploaded it and it got 500 views. Sure, it underperformed considering all the effort, but I am not dwelling on the past. I have learned so much and can apply that knowledge to my next project. I learned from this many things and I can improve on a lot of stuff, like the encoding that I use for rendering or the length of the final video. Also, the dark background choice just doesn't work for a YouTube short. Well, this and much more. Thanks for watching. Remember, sometimes a single word of encouragement can change someone's outcome. So keep it up and success might be yours soon. Peace out and don't forget to check out my others video. Peace. See you next time.